What's going on, everybody? John here with Mock Motorsport, and today I'm actually going to be doing a little video in getting your vehicle prepped for the racetrack. That's right. As you all know, if you've been watching my videos, I'm competing in the Ontario Time Attack Series, and I have my 2018 BRZ behind me here, and I'm just going to do a little quick tutorial, or maybe not even a tutorial, but just a little quick kind of overview on what you should do to get your vehicle ready for the racetrack. Because I think, safety is always paramount when it comes to the racetrack, and it's important to ensure that not only is your vehicle in top condition as far as the fluids are concerned and everything, but you're going to want to double check some bolts, you're going to want to double check some nuts, and you're going to want to make sure that everything is torqued down and ready to go, because you're going to be putting this vehicle under a lot more load and stress than you would on the day-to-day driving on your city streets. So it's imperative that you ensure that everything that's bolted and fastened to this vehicle stays exactly where it belongs. So let's have a look.
All right, guys, so the first thing I like to do is just start with the basics. Let's check fluids. So right off the bat, we check our clutch fluid back there, and it's in great shape. We check our brake fluid here, and you just want to ensure that the fluid is up to the top mark, okay? So max, top, whichever. You want to ensure that the fluid is always topped up. So I actually had to add just a touch of brake fluid. Then moving over, we're going to want to make sure that our coolant reservoir is up. I usually like to keep it just a touch below the fill line. And of course, you want to check your coolant by removing the cap when the car is cold and ensure that the coolant is up to where it should be. And then naturally, we check our oil. Pretty straightforward. Because I use this vehicle for track use, I tend to actually put just a touch more oil than the top dot on the dipstick. I like to do that because as you're going into the corners and the vehicle's being exposed to extreme G's, you're going to want to ensure that as that oil is sloshing around in the pan, because I don't have a baffled pan, that we're not going to starve the pickup of any oil. Now, my vehicle is equipped with a oil cooler setup from Jackson Racing, and the one thing I always like to check is I just like to check and ensure that these lines, that there are no leaks, and I just do a little check with my finger, make sure that it's dry, or get a rag and just check in there. Anytime you've modified the vehicle, or even in stock form, it's not a bad idea to just check any points where there could be leaks, like even your OEM coolant hoses, checking the clamps, all sorts of things. Again, the vehicle is going to be under a lot more load and pressure than it would be day-to-day driving, so it's important to just double check. Now, if your vehicle is modified with different suspension, one thing that I do, because I've got these aftermarket, is I've got the Vorschlag top camber plates here. Now, whether it be Vorschlag or TN or whatever the case may be, it's always good to ensure that these guys are all torqued down and they're not moving anywhere. If you got a spherical bearing in here, as most of you've probably experienced, these over time will come a little loose. So it's always good to just snug these back up so you don't get that clunking in the front end that you'll typically find with these sorts of configurations. Now, what I've gone and done furthermore is I've just got a product over here. I'll just show you here. It's called Warranty Seal. This is actually from my days of working with Worth, but this is some great stuff. And what I do is, the OEMs use this a lot. And what I do is after I've torqued down all the nuts and bolts, I literally just mark everything. That way I know that if I'm at the track, if I just do a quick visual, I can just check and see if anything has come loose. If I hear an unusual noise or an unusual clunk, if I can narrow down the area where it's coming from, it's going to be fairly obvious as to what's causing that once I see one of these little guys, not lined up with where I've already made the markings. All right, now moving on to the brakes. Again, when we want to just double check the suspension and ensure that everything is good, which I already have. And again, I'm going to be putting the Warranty Seal marks on here on the collars just to make sure that everything is lined up. Also a good idea to do that on the bolts that hold everything in place. And, I would do the same for the rear. And we'll go over that in a second. Now, the front brakes, my vehicle is equipped with the Brembos. The one thing I like to do is just do a quick inspection on the pads. I'm running the Project Mu Club Racers, and what I like to do is I just like to pull the pads off, just do a visual inspection, look for any uneven wear, and sometimes I'll even rotate them around. If you're using pads that are not directional, then it's not a bad idea to just slide those pads out, you know, every so often or every so many events. Slide those pads out, switch them over, put them in a different orientation so that they can actually wear evenly over time, and you're going to get a little more time overall from those pads. Now finally, you want to just check the threads and just make sure. I'm using the ARP extended studs, and you know, everything is looking good on my studs, and I've gone and checked the threads on the inside of my lugs as well. Always good to have a spare set of these just in case, especially if you're using the aluminum tuner nuts. Now moving to the rear of the vehicle, you know, same idea for here, guys. Again, you're going to want to ensure that everything is nice and snug, nice and tight. You know, if you have any of that marking, even whiteout, if you have whiteout, borrow your girlfriend or your wife's nail polish, anything, just to make a little mark, that way you know, okay? So same thing here, we just do a visual check the brake lines, make sure the clip and everything is in place, make sure nothing is binding, everything looks good. You know, that's what we're looking for here. And then finally, moving to the rear or underside of the vehicle. The one thing we want to check is we're going to just double check. As you can see here, I'm running the differential inserts. I like to make sure those bolts are nice and snug and torqued down. I've got the SPL control arms. We make sure those things are all bolted down. And then if you look, I've got the, you can't really tell in the video, but I'm running the white line rear carrier or subframe bushing inserts. And I like to make sure that that's all nice and snug. It's always a good idea too to just double check everything. You know, when you're down here, just take a wrench to it. There's no harm in making sure that everything is nice and snug. Then I'll crawl further underneath the vehicle and make sure I've got sufficient exhaust clearance and nothing has changed there, just to make sure nothing is going to bang around. All right, now finally, the other thing you're going to want to check is your air pressure. So if you're not bringing a compressor or an air pig with you to the track, then I strongly encourage you to check your air pressure ahead of time. That way you know you've got sufficient air pressure. If you have a tire gauge that you bring with you to the track, then you can at least drop the pressure as the heat expands and increases the pressure in the tires. Well, that's pretty much it for the exterior of the car. Finally, we'll move to the interior. This one's pretty simple, guys. So for the interior of the car, one thing I like to check is I just make sure that everything loose has been removed from the vehicle, okay? So I check the door pockets, cup holders, even the glove box, and I go into the trunk and I remove anything that's not really of any importance or necessary for the race. Some guys will go as far as removing the floor mats, because if you don't have the clip-in type, the last thing you want to have happen is the floor mat itself sliding beneath the brake or gas pedal, causing any sort of interference. So yeah, I just do a once over, and again, I remove anything that's not essential or that's not necessary for track day, anything loose, I pull it out of the car. That way you don't have anything that's going to interrupt your day.
What I take with me to a track event, including tools, as well as some essentials that I find work really well to bring with you to the track, and some things that I've learned and some little secrets and some shortcuts that I've learned over the years to help you have the most with the least amount of tools available. There's always going to be a scenario where you're never going to have the right tool for the job, and the one thing that I've always found is that guys at the track are often super helpful. It's a great group of people, and you know, there's never been a situation where, you know, and myself included, I've lent out equipment and tools, but there's never been a situation where somebody's just flat out said, no, you can't use any of my tools. So, you know, if you don't have it, that being said, you don't want to show up at a track event unprepared. But that being said, if you're missing something, I'm sure if you ask around, somebody will more than likely be available to give you a hand, and will actually be able to help you with your vehicle and maybe even help you repair something trackside if need be. All right, thanks for watching. Again, like and subscribe.